Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
So, Bishop, something that's really interesting, and you may when you see me in person, you may hit me upside my head for this, but I had no idea until last week that Seymour, who was the originator of Azusa Street, was a black guy.
Oh my God, he was a black guy, and wait a minute, he was a black guy and he was Baptist.
I had no idea. So I was reading an article online that was referencing Azusa Street, et cetera, and this was the first time ever in my life. And I've been hearing about Azusa Street for 30 years, but this was the first time I'd ever seen a picture of it. And when I looked at the picture, I said, "That guy is black."
Yes.
So
you must be black, but there has been, Pastor, a systematic attempt within scholarly circles to whitewash Pentecostalism and to deny credit to William J. Seymour, because by doing so, you would have to then designate Pentecostalism as a black church movement. Now, William Joseph Seymour had a teacher by the name of Charles Fox Parham, who organized the Apostolic Faith School in Topeka, Kansas. He moved that school to Houston, Texas. While in Houston, Texas, William Joseph Seymour became a student of his. He left that school and went to California and launched the Azusa Street Revival Movement. And so many scholars who prefer to see Pentecostalism through a white lens try to credit Charles Fox Parham for being the founder of Pentecostalism and deny credit to William Joseph Seymour. However, Charles Fox Parham not only was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, he also had a failed ministry. And so you cannot credit him for a movement that was a failure while in the hands of the person who was trying to forward the movement. It was the student of Charles Fox Parham, a black man who had pastored a Baptist church in Cincinnati, Ohio, who went to Houston, Texas, looking for family members that had been lost during the time of slavery. That he comes upon Charles Fox Parham, he is indoctrinated with the doctrine of a third work of grace, goes to California, launches this revival, and the rest is history. Pentecostalism in this country was delivered to America in the hands of a black man.
So if I'm listening to this and I don't have the opportunity to know personally Bishop Lewter, and I'm listening to this, one of my obvious questions is, where's the book? Where's the book that all of this is in? Sure.
There are several, and if you would allow me this commercial, so to speak.
Absolutely.
If individuals would go to S as in Sam, T as in Tom, C as in cat, U as in university, stcu.teachable.com, stcu.teachable.com. I have a number of online courses where I go over this, complete with documentation, bibliography, and references to the books that support this, what I am sharing with you. But let me give some references online here and now. I'm trying to think of the author. It escapes me off the top of my head, but there is a book that is entitled The Dictionary of Pentecostal churches. You can look that up, you can Google that, and it has a listing of the manifold denominations and references of where that comes from. I would also recommend to you a book called Black Fire by Estrelder Alexander. Estrelder Alexander, Black Fire. Also,
did you say Black Fire as in
Fire?
Okay.
Yes, Black Fire by Estrelder Alexander.
And we'll put all of these in our show notes as well for people to get.
Great. I would also recommend, and this is probably one of the best books in this particular area, a book by Henry H. Mitchell, Black Preaching, that discusses many of the early personalities that I have made reference to in my presentation tonight. And any Google search on history of the Black church will give you any number of books, blogs, essays, articles that will repeat and reflect those things that I've talked about tonight.
That's amazing. I think my concern is, Bishop, though, because the internet is fair game. I think so much history that we see based on some of what you said tonight or today is we don't know if it's legit or not. We don't know if it's been whitewashed or not. We don't know, if it's credible or not. Just because it's online or just because it's in print, how do we know that it's not been, using the term that you used earlier, whitewashed? But I mean, I guess that's the point of research, though, huh?
Sure. Let me say this to you, Pastor. I feel your pain and your frustration. I am a graduate of Oberlin College, 1976, a graduate of Harvard University in 1979, a graduate of United Theological Seminary with an earned doctoral degree in 1993. And I was always frustrated in the classroom because it seemed to me that gaining access to this kind of information, especially as it related to the benefit and the credit of Black people in terms of the church narrative, was always more difficult to find, whether it was in the library of Oberlin or on the shelves of Harvard. It was always more difficult to find when the conversation had to do with Black folk than it had to do with their white counterparts. And so there is an enormous amount of frustration in terms of research because, again, there has been a systematic attempt to deny credit and to minimize the availability of material that supports the very narrative that we're talking about tonight. And I remember fighting with professors. I had one of my early papers at Harvard University was a paper entitled The African Origin of Christianity. And it was based upon a book by Dr. Ben Yosef Chikanen, who was a brilliant scholar out of Oxford University. I got an F on that paper, and I don't mind calling his name. My Old Testament professor, Michael Coogan, first year of my NDiv program, Michael Coogan gave me an F because I submitted a paper that was entitled The African Origin of Christianity. He gave me an F. I appealed it academically, and it was reviewed by a panel of scholars, and I was awarded an A in the end. But initially, he gave me an F. And in private circles with complete deniability, this is what he said to me, Pastor. He said, I didn't give you an F because it wasn't true. I gave you an F because you dared to write it. Woo!
Wow. So you were taking a risk, even, I mean, from a social, political standpoint, and very well, you could have been risking your entire career at that point.
Sure, but you have to understand, see, Black folk ain't been going to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton for so long. And the attitude was that you ought to be so glad just to be here and to get through the door until you ought not challenge any of the fundamental pillars that we have built white Christianity upon. We do not want to give you the leverage of a Harvard University and you say what you're saying with the backing of a university degree from our institution. And that's why I have dedicated myself with the credentials that I have earned over the years to speak this kind of truth, because otherwise it would remain concealed and hidden.
All right, Bishop. So let's bring some of this discussion to the 21st century, because we started this discussion, and you rightfully so quickly redirected us, and you started us in first century and all of that. You brought us all the way up, and so here we are now. We're in the 21st century. We've got 8 major African American denominations. We've got lots of non-denominational churches, independent reformations, and fellowships and networks of churches. We've now got the term multi-ethnic churches. You've got the notion of even what some would call diverse evangelical churches, which is a whole other discussion in the political climate that we're in. One of the questions that I asked you a few weeks ago, and I'm gonna layer this question a little bit. So bring us to the 21st century. Let me hear your thoughts on that, on where you feel like the church currently is from a historical standpoint. But then let me hear your thoughts about the current model of ministry that we have.
Sure. Well, let me begin here, because I contend, one of my premises, Pastor, is that history is not linear. It is cyclic, meaning it goes in circles. And so wherever we are, we have been here before, because there is nothing new under the sun. A part of my presentation tonight was to point out that the church came to near extinction in response to the cultural pressure placed on it by the age of enlightenment and the age of reason. And that it took a George Whitefield and a John Wesley and a revival movement to bring the church from the brink of extinction. I believe we're in a similar circumstance today, Pastor. And I believe that we're in an information age, and technology and information has brought the church today where the age of enlightenment brought the church to 300 years ago. And just as it took a first and second great awakening to rescue the church of yesteryear, I am equally convinced that it is going to take a third great awakening to rescue the church from where it is today. I am convinced that, and I know we don't like to talk about it because our ego is involved, vanity and our pride. But here is the truth of the matter. If we are brutally honest and transparent with each other and ourselves, we will have to confess that none of us are seeing the number of people we were seeing 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Now, some churches, yes, are doing better than others. But the reality is most of us are seeing more empty pews than we have seen in a mighty, mighty long time. And I am arguing that the information age, the alternatives that have been made available via technology has caused the church to have to face a need for a third great awakening to do for us today what the first and second great awakening had to do for the church in the past. And I think that's where we are. And that's why I admire and I am so fascinated and excited about persons like yourself, Pastor, because you are the John Wesleys and the George Whitefields and the Jonathan Edwards and the Charles Wesleys of the 21st century. You are the individuals that will have to create a revival movement. And just as those personalities stopped doing church as usual, came out of the church building, had open air revivals under tents. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what we have to do today, but what I am saying is we're gonna have to break the mold, and we're gonna have to do something as radically different today as what the pioneers of the awakening movement had to do in their season and in their era to continue to make the church relevant. I fear that we're living at a time where the church runs the risk of becoming obsolete and irrelevant because we're clinging to tools that were fashioned for the 20th century when we now abide in the 21st century.
Talk some more about that, Bishop, because I think that starts to get to the core of, I think, the second part of my question about our current model of ministry. So, what is our current model of ministry and where did we get it from?
Well, our current model of ministry, unfortunately, is patterned after the dominant culture. And so I think in recent years, we have chosen to be innovative and to be imaginative. And watch this, Pastor, to redefine what ministry is. Let me see if I can give you a simple example. I grew up as a PK. I follow a father who was a pastor, a grandfather who was a pastor, and a great-grandfather who was a pastor. Their assumption of ministry was that God came first, and they made equivalent God with the local church. So the local church came first before anything else because of their interpretation that the church represented God. And as a result, as a PK, I grew up suffering from the lack and the absence of parents who, because they made church a priority and family secondary, I grew up with an animosity and an attitude and being adversarial toward the church because my interpretation was that the church took my parents away from me. Now, today is a whole new attitude. And today, ministry is driven by the notion that your first ministry is to your family. And given a choice between going to Johnny's Little League baseball game or attending prayer service, you go to Johnny's baseball game. Because if you're not ministering at home, you cannot be effective ministering in the marketplace. Now, I use that, Pastor, as a simple example, but I really mean for it to be profound. There has to be a reordering of our priorities if we're going to rescue the church from oblivion. And a lot of that has to do with our attitude, our mindset, and what we view as important. I know all churches have not adopted this, but listen, I grew up in a church where being pastor meant you sat in a big chair in the pulpit, elevated over everybody else with your legs crossed. That's no longer the typical norm. Now it is the norm in a whole lot of places, but there is so much imagination, there's so much innovation. Sitting on the floor, using the pulpit as only being used for the conveyance of the word, but not as a pedestal, not as a throne, not as a cultural elevation of royalty in a local setting. And I think it's those kind of attitudes, those kind of approaches that we're going to have to really wrestle with and come to terms with, because the tools, Pastor, that we have used in the past may not be as effective tomorrow as they have been yesterday.
So Bishop, if I'm having this discussion right now with a person who is a pastor or a ministry leader, they're in their 60s or 70s, and I'm saying we've got to reinvent, we got to adjust. What do I say to them that allows the light bulb to go off?
Well, I think you number one, you ask them how is what you're doing working for you now? Because if it is working, then there's no need to fix it. But if you can identify that there is an inadequacy, that there is a deficit, there is a shortage, then your observation should force you to consider what perhaps you need to do differently that's going to yield better results than what you're currently seeing.
Yeah, that's good, Bishop. That's good. Okay, so we we've talked about a whole lot, and I know our time is getting to get away from us here a little bit. From a historical standpoint, with the cyclical historical nature that you just expounded upon for the last few minutes, what is your view or your approach on the multi-ethnic church?
Woo! My observation, Pastor, as it results to the multi-ethnic church, I tend to get in trouble when I do these kind of interviews online, and I get very, very nervous and hesitant because I know that sometimes my transparency and sometimes my boldness gets me in trouble with my colleagues. But let me be forthright enough to say to you, Pastor, that I do not feel that the Black church and the white church are the same thing. Remember, I went back to the religion of the oppressor is not the religion of the oppressed. And the origin and the roots of Christianity in this country are in two different places, Pastor, for the Black church and the white church. Now, I am not saying that they cannot come together, but my frustration over the years has been that Blacks will flock to a church with white leadership, but rarely, if ever, will whites rally and choose to follow a church with Black leadership. And that lack of reciprocity concerns me. And I don't know how we arrest that. But I do think that there is something at the core, the innate core of white people who have been taught, told, and conditioned to believe that that no one is their equal, makes it difficult for people of that persuasion to follow an organization or an institution where Black genius, Black intellectualism, and Black leadership is on display. And when we are more equal in when as many white folk will come to a Black church as Black folk who run to a white church, until that happens, I just don't think we have equity, and it makes me hesitant and slow to embrace multi-ethnic congregation. Now that's just me. And my attitude is not for everybody. Somebody has got to be the militant radical so that there can be a compromise candidate somewhere in the middle. I am the Malcolm X so that you'll be happy to have a Martin Luther King.
Well, Bishop, this has been very insightful. I got to say that growing up in the African American church context, I wish that I would have had some context to know this history. And unfortunately, even in school, I didn't take history serious. As I'm getting older, I am learning to appreciate history. I'm learning to appreciate the history of the church and the progression of the church. And I'm understanding even more the importance of an intergenerational approach.
Okay.
I think that there are so many of our churches where on one extreme we have many who are just old and seasoned, and then we have others that are just energized and young, but very few who have been able to bring multiple generations together. And more, the more conversations I have, the more books I read, the more podcasts I listen to, the more interactions that I observe, I'm developing a Nehemiah moment where my burden is becoming, we've got to figure out how to create multi-generational churches.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Because if we don't have someone to pass the baton to, we're going to go out of business.
Bishop, let me ask you this one last question, because I think you have done an amazing job at giving us several thousand years of history in a short amount of time. In our current context, what attributes would you use to describe a healthy church in the 21st century?
Thank you for the question, Pastor. I think the major barometer and measuring tool that ought to be used to determine success and effectiveness is transformation, the degree to which we are able to change lives. Now, I know that goes against the grain because the typical measurement of success is numbers. I used to hear Jesse Jackson say when I was a little bit younger that there's a difference between a man who has sheepskin on the wall and sheep standing around the wall. And I think we have to focus upon, and this has nothing to do with size, Pastor. It has to do with the integrity of ministry. What I am saying is that I view a more successful pastor as someone who has 10 members whose lives they have changed and have remained changed than someone who has 1,000 folk and have no moral control, no moral imperative, no transformation in the lives of the masses that they stand over. And I think that has to be the measurement.
That's so good, Bishop. that is so good. I feel like every time I'm around you, I feel like I'm drinking water from a fire hydrant.
Well, yeah. I appreciate you, sir.
All right, Bishop. So I got some questions I want to shoot at you. I give these to every guest just as a way to have a little fun and for our audience to learn a little bit more about who was on the microphone today. But before I do that, let me give you space really fast to put a bow on top of this gift that you've given us tonight. Is there anything else that you feel that you want to share or give context to or put closure to that you've already shared or that you feel like we may have missed?
Sure, and I've already done it, and I thank you for allowing me to do so again. I have dedicated myself to educating the pew and the pulpit. I am privileged to train those who are becoming bishops in the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship. I've done that for several years, and I'm very, very proud of the output in that particular vein. Again, I have organized an online school where I teach so much of what I'm talking about. And so I would like to put on the screen or have you put on the screen or share with your audience that stcu.teachable.com. stcu.teachable.com is a place where you can go and peruse so much of the material that I have labored over for the last several years. I put together over 50 online courses in a variety of areas that persons like yourself and others can take advantage of. And so if you would visit STCU, take a look at what we have, take advantage of that opportunity. In addition to making video lectures available, I add to that component a personal coaching element so that you're not just watching videos, but there are times that we will sit down via Zoom and have conversations to make sure that what's in the lecture notes and the video lectures is being held in your heart and in your mind.
Bishop, have you written any books yet?
Yes, if you go to Amazon.com, simply do a search for Andy C. Lewter. I have a number of titles, primarily ebooks, that are available at Amazon.com.
That's awesome. All right, Bishop. So the goal here is for you to answer the question as fast as you can with the first thought that comes to mind.
Okay. That can be risky. Pastor.
I know. That's what makes it. That's what makes it really fun. All right, here we go.
Okay.
If you could do any other career, what would you do?
I would be an attorney. I trained to be an attorney and switched at the last minute to study theology at Harvard. I actually completed 2 years at Harvard Law School, and when I see now what the graduates of Harvard Law School make compared to the graduates of Harvard Divinity School, I'm not sure the Lord was really speaking to me.
Well, I'm going to say I'm thankful, and I think there's probably thousands of other ministers and preachers and pastors who are thankful that you heard from God and made that switch.
Bless
All
you.
right. Apple or PC?
Apple.
Your favorite food?
Ribs, spare ribs.
Favorite movie?
The Godfather.
Favorite
and
TV?
House of Cards.
Bishop, you like House of Cards?
I've binge on it. I've been with Claire. All 6 seasons. When she opened the door and had a room full of female cabinet, I was right with her. Hey.
You know, Bishop, I was a little disappointed in that last season, but that's another conversation for another day.
Well, they had to get rid of him some kind of way. They had to get rid of him. I love Kevin. I love Kevin, but you know, I knew he wasn't going to survive.
Yeah, he messed that up.
But Claire is ruthless. I think Claire is more ruthless than Francis.
Absolutely. All right. Favorite quote?
If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain.
Top 3 items on your bucket list?
Preach in Africa, retire with a healthy income, and grow lima beans.
You say grow lima beans?
Yeah, that's my favorite food.
Wow. Last 3 books you've read. My God, that's a hard question for you.
Good gracious. Henry Mitchell's Black Preaching. I just reread that. Morning Coffee with Charles Nesbitt out of Atlanta, Georgia, and Bishop Joseph Walker's last book.
All right, awesome. What's been the highest moment of your life?
The birth of my children.
How many do you have, Bishop?
2, a girl and a boy.
Okay. When you're alone in the car, what do you think about?
Getting to my destination without wrecking the car.
Spoken like a true New Yorker.
That's right.
All right, Bishop, 2 more questions for you. What does the typical first 2 hours of your day look like?
I have enrolled in a gym, and so I go to the gym 4 times a week, and so that's usually the first thing that I do. I'm actually I did lower body yesterday, and I'm so sore I can barely sit in this chair that I'm in now.
Wow. All right, and last question. Did you win any superlatives in high school?
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I was in the speech club, and I won the state oratorical contest, and so I won best spokesman or best speaker or something like that when I was in high school.
Wow. Well, Bishop, this has been absolutely amazing, and from a historical standpoint, I know that we only touched the tip of the iceberg, but I think that this was healthy for us to be able to expose many in my audience and maybe even some new listeners to this discussion. You all have heard Bishop Lewter say multiple times tonight that he has labored very hard to put a lot of this content in a teachable format. That is stcu.teachable.com. I'm going to also have all of this in the show notes for you to go check it out, support him, support the work that he's doing. I can tell you from an authentic standpoint that there are not a lot of folks out there that are putting this kind of information together for you to get it in a balanced and a holistic way. So, Bishop, words probably can't describe the magnitude of it, but I'll simply say thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So those of you that are listening, thank you again for listening and sharing in our podcast episode today. Our announcer is going to come and give you some more details about how to connect with us and how to follow up with us. Of course, I want to give you a personal invitation that if you have enjoyed what you've heard, please go to iTunes directly or even Google Play and leave a rating and leave a review. That is actually how other listeners follow us. I'm thankful for all of you that have already done that. I would love to hear from you directly, personally. Please send us an email at info at thewiseideapodcast.com. I end every single podcast the same way, and I'll end it this way. Live wisely.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewiseideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.